That was awesome. Thanks so much for playing that song. Hey there. Hey there, everybody. Welcome to Speakeasy Spiritual Community. We have such a hot topic that's coming to you live from Todd Fink today. So I'm so glad that you're here. We're talking about anger, sacred anger, rationalized anger, that, that monster, that beast, that, embarrassing masquerade, or that like worthy fire that is used in a really effective way. So I'm super excited about this conversation. My name is Maureen Muldoon. I'm the founder and spiritual director here at Speakeasy. And right now we're going into our 13th year. November will be our anniversary. So we're looking forward to sharing a few special events that we have coming up. But in the meantime, Speakeasy is a diverse and progressive spiritual community sharing a message of love, engaging in conversations that inspire creative expression and spiritual well-being. We honor the Divine Mother, and we follow the teachings of A Course in Miracles and the principles of love. And we see you as a unique expression of love, capable of divine embodiment. And here at Speakeasy, we simply say that love is our religion, that care is our currency, and that truth is our goal. I'm sorry, we don't say truth is our goal. We say peace is our goal. It's only been 13 years. Give me a break. We attempt to speak easily about tough and tender topics so that we can navigate life with a little more grace and ease. And we dedicate this service today and this conversation today to the Divine Mother, to Mary Magdalene, to Jesus Christ, to Buddha, to all the holy names of God and their teachings, all the enlightened saints, and specifically the teachings of A Course in Miracles. And we welcome you, and we're so glad that you're here. We are a social media friendly community, so we invite you to check in on our Facebook platform and share and invite your friends and family to our events. And if you're watching on our live stream on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe and share it with your friends. We are a spiritual community with a global message, so we invite you to also help share that message through text messaging. If you received a text today to remind you of our conversation, you can just take a moment and check in with the Holy Spirit and see if there's someone that might benefit from this conversation, again, on anger and a sacred deep dive into the concept of anger, how it works for us and against us. So it's easy to do that. Just look for the text that you received, copy it, paste it, forward it. Everyone likes to be invited. Remember that. Everyone likes to be invited. So it's great to be here with you this morning. If this is your first time, welcome. And if this is your second time, welcome back. If it's your third time, we hope that you consider this your spiritual home. Our spiritual community is a place to connect, and we'd love to be able to recognize you by name specifically during the conversation. So if you feel comfortable, please put your name in your Zoom profile. Before we get to the talk, which will be facilitated by Todd Fink, we have Shannon Provost, who will be sharing some invitations that are coming up this week in our community, as well as announcements. That will be followed by Sherry Ransom, who will be leading us in prayer to prepare us for the talk. And then we'll have the talk, and then we'll have a community offering, and then the conversation. And in the conversation, we encourage you not to leave your brains or your beliefs or your backgrounds at the door. We bring it all in. We don't have all the answers, but we love contemplating the questions with you. So now that you have a roadmap of our gathering, I'm going to go ahead and pass this to Shannon Provost.
Hello, everybody. My name is Shannon Provost, and I am a grateful member of the Speakeasy community. We are a virtual community offering daily classes and events on Zoom to support you through the week in your spiritual journey. This week, we invite you to participate in Sacred Movement Yoga. It happens Monday through Friday at 7:30 a.m. Central Time. This is a gentle yoga practice to start your day balanced in mind, body, and spirit, led by Regina Vertigo, and offered on a love donation basis. Fridays at 7:18 p.m. Central Time, gather with us for Tucked In with Our Divine, led by Gigi Laporte. This is a 20 to 30-minute practice to pray and close out your day in a gratitude with a gentle reminder of A Course in Miracle lesson, A Course of Miracle lesson of that day, and an invitation to the Divine Mother to tuck us in for peaceful sleep. I did that last week, and it was so helpful. All of our classes and events and details can be found in our calendar of events. The link will be in the chat, and when you see an offering in the calendar that is of interest, click on it, and the details and registration information will be there for you. Or go to our website, speakeasyspiritualcommunity.com. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Sherry Ransom, and I am a grateful member of Speakeasy Spiritual Community. Let us prepare for a moment of prayer. I ask that you just take a deep breath as we prepare this space to hear a wonderful message. Dear Divine, we gather this morning as one mind, one heart, and one soul. We speak a blessing on all who are gathered here, their loved ones, their friends, everyone they might know. We speak a blessing on all who have worked diligently to bring this Sunday to fruition. We offer love and gratitude for answered prayers and everyday grace. Bless our speaker who has prepared a message that will illuminate our hearts and minds. We now offer this moment of silence in reverence for the many gifts that we enjoy. And we close with Amen.
Thanks, Sherry. Okay, so now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Todd Fink. And I know you already know him, but if you're new here today, he's the host of Kind Mind podcast, which is just, spiritual eye candy that just keeps you thinking all day long. And he's got tons of resources over at Kind Mind podcast. He's also the co-founder of the Giving Tree Band, and he is a licensed therapist who holds certificates in addiction counseling and mindfulness meditation teachings. And he comes to us once a month on the third Sunday. And he always brings a really wonderful vantage point on navigating concepts such as this. Todd and I met way back in the day when we joined in conversation over sex, actually. It was called Howl in Harmony. And we kindred spirits who were willing to have the tough, tender, and sometimes taboo conversations. And this one feels like that. It feels like how do we talk about anger? He's going to escort us through the minefields and the mindfulness that can be had when we dance with anger. And so please open your minds, your hearts, and your willingness to be in this conversation. And welcome, Todd Fink.
Thanks, Maureen. Yeah, happy to be here with you all. It's always meaningful and inspiring to connect with you all, and especially to converse at the end and learn from you in dialogue. I share my ideas, but those ideas are improved and refined with your reflections and feedback and input. So I really enjoy this dance. Today, I've prepared some reflections on anger. I'd like to start by acknowledging the word itself and its origins, the etymology of the word anger, which came into English from Old Norse. And Old Norse traditions are so rich in meaning and mythology. Anger. So when you think about anger and you remove that anger, it really does orient you back to the Norse tradition, but it meant grief, sorrow, or distress. And that word descends from Angus in like Proto-Germanic or Angas, but those experts in etymology think that the root sound is ang, A-N-G-H, which means tight or painful or constricted or to choke. So if you think about some other words that share that root sound ang, I think it gives us some more insight into how anger is experienced and channeled or expressed. So angst, um, that's German for anxiety. Anguish, um, anguish in Latin meant narrowness, distress associated with narrowness. The narrowness doesn't have to be literal. It could be some kind of narrowing of the social conditions. Anxiety, of course, shares that ang sound. Angina, Latin for choking or tightening in the throat or chest. So originally anger was not just about hostility or aggression, but this felt sense of inner constriction, the tightening up of our body and our breath while under some kind of duress, emotional duress. I wanted to speak about anger because it's been coming up in my work lately as a clinical therapist. I'm working with children as clients and patients for the first time in my life. And I leaned into that because it just felt like a giant population that I had almost no experience with. I worked with a lot of teens, but that's still quite different than clients who are unable to speak yet or haven't developed language yet. So I have clients as young as 2 and 3, and anger is such a prevalent theme. I'm going to come back to that. I'm just introducing why anger for today. But I was thinking also that we got Halloween coming up. Maybe if my talk was next week here at Speakeasy, it would just be more about spooky season. But with that around the corner, I was considering maybe it should be something, a little bit more Halloweeny. But then it dawned on me that my wish to explore anger is not mutually exclusive from things on the spooky side, because in the past I've talked about fear. We tend to go towards fear when we're thinking about how to engage with Halloween and the thin veil between this world and the other world. And I've talked about the role of scary movies and like horror zeitgeist, where you have the werewolf or Psycho and then Jason and Freddy. From decade to decade, it says something about a relationship to fear in pop culture. But while fear may be the essence of Halloween and the feeling that we pursue as consumers, anger is arguably the scariest emotion, and especially for different groups or identities, because it reveals how thin the line can be, in this case, between protector and predator. This is especially true for different identities in conflict and in the context of power. We were talking, Maureen and I and a few others were talking before we started, just about how sometimes anger being expressed looks funny, but it depends on who's expressing that and in what setting. When we witness someone's rage, whether in ourselves or in others, what does that mean to us? And that maybe something that we can talk about in the conversation, because I'm sure each of us has our own experience with that. It's something so deeply personal, what that's like for us in our families, in our workplaces, in the context of our lives. It might do well, though, to remind some of us of our own potential for harm. especially when we scale this out and we look at the way our government behaves, the way police behave and armies behave. For some of us, given where we sit in the matrix of advantage and disadvantage, we would do well to reflect on our own potential to harm others or to be aggressive. So this makes anger culturally charged. Some um, societies, ideologies, entire systems of thought and ways of life can even glorify it as strength. Others repress it altogether as taboo, and maybe only for certain groups. Framing anger then as this haunting of the heart allows us to explore it as a shadow or unacknowledged emotion, which in the context of spooky season can become the ghost that won't rest in us until we actually see it. Well, what is this? What's going on here? And understand it. Coming back to Halloween for a moment, in the 1979 horror classic, When a Stranger Calls, a, a teenage babysitter um, receives increasingly terrifying phone calls from a stranger, but the tension escalates. And this is what makes this movie stand out. The tension escalates when she realizes the calls are coming from inside the house, and it leads to, life and death struggle with the anonymous madman. And then that same premise was resurrected, as Hollywood is sure to do with anything that's impactful, in the Scream series in the 90s when I was a teenager, which launches with Drew Barrymore receiving a call, and the call's either from the stranger in the house or, nearby. But another interesting way that I engage with the energy of intense anger is as the monster within ourselves. And the anger can be the calling from our own subconscious or unconscious, um, the the basement of our psyche or the attic of our psyche of in our mind body house. So anger, like a monster, it can be terrifying, not because it's foreign, but because it's familiar. In the great classic predecessor horror stories, like the 1800s vignettes of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, or Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and even farther back into mythology, you have the Wolfman, where a man turns into a beast on the full moon. The full moon in wisdom traditions like Buddhism, where the Buddha was born on a full moon, enlightened on a full moon day in May, and died on the full moon day, all in May. But it has great symbolism. It's that the full moon, as opposed to the waxing or waning or new moon, it represents bringing more light and attention than usual to our dark side. The dark side of our psyche, symbolized in this case by the actual nighttime in the story, and then the full moon bringing transformation. But all of these horror stories are allegories for the human struggle with our repressed emotion and moral duality. So anger, when it's culturally denied, or when our families socialize it out of us or moralize it out of existence, it doesn't just vanish. And that's what these stories are about. It doesn't just heal up on its own. It can mutate. That's what the werewolf represents, with all the hair and the nails and the gnashing of the teeth. It mutates in the darkness of social suppression. So Halloween can serve as a ritual acknowledgement that our inner beasts can't always be exercised. Instead, they need awareness and integration. There is a way to transform our anger into righteous anger, and I wanted to specifically make uh, uh, draw attention to that dialectic, righteous anger versus self-righteous anger. So righteous anger when it's conscious. And this is all about being more conscious about our experiences in the context of layers of ecology. When it's more conscious, we can channel that primal force towards protection and justice rather than unfiltered destruction. There's a quote from the religious scholar Karen Armstrong that really resonates with me, which is, religious people often prefer to be right rather than compassionate. Often they don't want to give up their egotism. They want their religion to endorse their ego, their identity. And this is so powerful to me right now because I see how this is playing out at larger scales. The battles between identity groups, especially where religion is intersecting with power and politics. But her words reveal how easily the sacred fire of our conscience can be co-opted by institutions. And what begins as moral clarity can often harden into moral pride. And so the impulse to defend what we see as the truth in our scripture, or in our philosophy or our way of life or in our wisdom tradition, it becomes that impulse transforms into the desire to be seen as its defender. I am greatly influenced as a clinician by a book called The Mind Body Code by South American author and neuropsychologist Dr. Mario Martinez. And he offers a biological parallel to the spiritual insight that I'm talking about. He notes in his book that righteous anger is the kind born from compassion and dignity. And unlike what we know about protracted anger in the body, this kind strengthens the immune system. His research shows that it activates the nervous system briefly but cleanly, as though sharpening one's moral blade, without the rust or the corrosive nature that we think of with toxic anger and corroding from within. But that kind of anger is fueled by insecurity and judgment, and it floods the body. The self-righteous anger, like you offended my pride. It floods the body with stress hormones and triggers inflammation. So one fire illuminates, the other consumes. Righteous anger arises when someone perceives a genuine moral wrong, such as cruelty, oppression, betrayal. And the emotional energy is usually directed toward protecting values, restoring fairness, or defending others. Psychologically, it tends to be associated with empathy, usually on behalf of others, but it could be on behalf of ourselves when self-respect is involved, not pride and ego. It's purposeful. It seeks to bring balance or correct injustice and protecting vulnerable, not just enact vengeance, not simply to punish and dominate. Then it starts to spill over into self-righteous anger. And it is a self-aware type of anger. The person can reflect and recognize what the limits are of this energy and then integrate it once again constructively. So this kind of righteous anger, to engage with it, try to see how it supports moral courage. Like somebody having, especially a political leader, having the moral courage to call out corruption or not to stand with the corruption, or to confront, the systemic harm of an ideology. In moral psychology, righteous anger can be seen as a form of a moral emotion, like the morally elevating energy of compassion. It prompts pro-social behavior. It often does coexist with sadness or love for humanity, love for one's neighbor, loving our brothers and sisters. So again, just to distinguish that from the self-righteousness, that one originates less from empathy and more from ego protection, which means our adopted identities based on the impermanent roles that we play. So it's about moral superiority rather than moral consciousness or our group identities. And in this way, it is the shadow of righteous anger, because it's more focused on being right rather than doing what's right or living virtuously or living the Dharma, as different wisdom traditions in Asia outline. So it tends to be egoic, fueled by a need to prove one's virtue or intelligence or moral purity. It's often just purely reactive, disproportionate to the triggering circumstances, divisive more than unifying, usually born of an us versus them mentality, which a person or group then uses to justify their excesses of aggression under the banner of virtue, and usually unreflective. Person or group can't look at themselves in the mirror and see that they're going too far. It's rarely open to feedback. Any feedback is considered toxic. The reaction to this kind of anger is seen as toxic, whereas the anger itself is being used toxically. So again, in cognitive behavioral terms, self-righteous anger involves black and white thinking, cognitive distortions, overgeneralizations, moral licensing, because I'm on the good side when making something black and white, when really everything is so much more nuanced, right? Because I'm on the good side, all my hostility is justified. The boundary between the two is about discernment. Does this anger expand or contract my heart? Is a good question for reflection. If it's like opening up with compassion, courage, shared humanity, clarity, versus the hardening of judgment, pride, hostility. In Buddhist psychology, there's a saying: anger with wisdom cuts through delusion. Anger without wisdom is delusion. Coming back to Dr. Martinez's philosophy of biocognition, which is how culture shapes our biology. He proposed that our thoughts and emotions aren't just isolated mental events. They are cultural biological feedback loops that then inform our immune and nervous and endocrine systems. Dr. Gabor Mate also touched on this in his research on anger, which is anger, like the biological immune system, which identifies toxic substances or pathogens which have been ingested or invaded our physical boundary of the body, of the skin. And then it identifies it, it either attacks it or neutralizes it into the lymph system, but somehow it needs to remove it. And when you come to the emotional layer of our identity, anger becomes the emotional immune system. And so Dr. Gabor Mate says, when that anger can't work for whatever reason, because it's taboo or it's stigmatized or it's socialized or it's moralized out of us or it's beaten out of us as children in abuse or family dysfunction, what happens? He believes this contributes to autoimmune disease, which is a confusion of these systems, which are just at different scales. You have your immune system at the cellular level, you have your anger at the emotional level. And if at some point there is confusion or learned helplessness, does the anger turn inward as depression? Does the immune system start to attack its own joints as some semblance of control? I know that many cases of self-injury or symptoms of self-injury in different clinical case evaluations, the onset is often in childhood or adolescence, when a child is living through dysfunction and their anger can't make a difference. But when they harm themselves, you can think of this as anger turned inward. They get a flood of endorphins, which are pain relievers, which gets them high, which changes their experience. Now there's some semblance of control, and this looks a lot like addiction, which is they use the self-injury to self-soothe, but over time, the brain habituates to the behavior, just like the brain develops tolerance for the drug, and you need more and more of the drug to achieve the same high. You need more and more self-harm to achieve the same relief. Therefore, it's not that the behavior didn't work or the drug didn't work as they tried to convince us of during the war on drugs, and why that campaign was a failure, but it didn't work forever. And that's often when somebody turns towards therapy, because now they want to stop this behavior because it's no longer working for them, but they don't know how else to retrain the brain or self-soothe. But anyways, in this framework, emotions like shame, honor, compassion, or anger are also embodied cultural interpretations that can either promote or inhibit our health. That's the bottom line here. So how and why someone experiences their anger matters as much, especially in my work engaging with individuals. It matters as much as the anger itself. We'd like to think that anger is just this universal energy or experience. And maybe one day it could be, or we could return to the abstract idea that anger has a meaning and it's the same meaning for everyone, but that would require so much transformation on the level of civilization. All right. Dr. Mario Martinez has a good quote, though, that kind of illustrates the delineation. A warrior protecting sacred ground versus a zealot defending in egoic ideology. So the first enhances vitality, a warrior protecting sacred ground. The second is depleting it. Keep in mind that when we're talking about the biology of anger, and the immune system, we have immune suppression, inflammation, cardiovascular strain, accelerated cellular aging, because stress wears out the telomeres. Telomeres are caps on the chromosomes and the DNA inside of the cell. And it's sort of like a shoelace, the strands of DNA, like the double helix. But when the cap of a shoelace wears down and breaks off, what happens? The shoelace starts to fray, and that corresponds to cellular aging and visible aging at the level of the body. Self-righteous anger activates these amygdala-driven circuits. Amygdala is the tiny almond-shaped structure that regulates our anger and our fight-flight. In trauma, in PTSD, in war veterans, the amygdala has been observed in MRI studies to be enlarged, hypertrophy in medicine. And when a person can perform this self-reflection and try to transform their anger or engage with it from a place of dignity and humanity, and if they have tools of compassion, self-compassion, if it's all about their own dignity or self-respect, it can soothe the amygdala and reduce the size of the amygdala in like 8 weeks of mindful compassion practice, um, which is a healing, which is a reversal of the hypertrophy and can bring a person back towards homeostasis, where like psychological distress or panic attacks are concerned with PTSD. Let me jump ahead here. What else did I want to share with you today? You could think of righteous anger as trying to tend to the sacred fire. Like imagine a ceremonial fire in certain religions like Hinduism, Zoroastrianism. Fire is um, an offering, a ceremony, or fire itself is the deity. And self-righteous anger, unlike the sacred fire, is more like a wildfire, an egoic wildfire that's just consuming. A wildfire in this case, which is usually arson, in which we call these large wildfires out west, arson um, and anthropogenic arson of climate change. But the point is that those fires just consume indiscriminately. They burn houses, they take out forests, vital forests, and so on. In the Bhagavad Gita, there's a saying, anger born of desire and attachment is destructive, but anger born of dharma is purifying. So again, we're talking about anger arising when you have such a strong desire and an attachment to that outcome. So to support righteous anger and healing from toxic anger, it can be helpful to check our attachments and to see if our desire is where the fire begins, and is the anger just because somebody's blocking our, or stands in the way of our insatiable desire. Can we be a little bit more playful with our desires, which means, hey, it may not work out this time, but maybe it's not the right time. Recently, I met a mariachi in New Mexico who lost his guitar teacher, and he described this teacher as so humble because he never imposed his greatness on anyone. Yet everyone knew he was great. He was a master, but he was not just a master of music, but a master of life and wisdom. And he exuded that wisdom because his students would say they felt no fear around him, specifically when they were performing with him or near him. Whereas otherwise, most musicians like myself will experience normal nerves or performance anxiety. So coming back to immunity, Gabor Mate was talking about how autoimmune disorders have to do with fear and anger, and whether or not our anger is safe or ends up becoming a form of learned helplessness. The last thing I want to do in this talk before we transition to the conversation is to look at a few other quick interpretations of anger, not just as its own thing, like its own siloed emotional experience, but as intimately and inseparably linked with all others, and depending on the context, with its apparent opposite. So I think of this as the Tao of anger. You know, the Taijitu, the yin yang symbol, where you have two sides, the black side and the white side, but each one also has a dot of the other, which means there is a connection. There is the seed of the other always present in its opposite. I mentioned I've been doing therapy with children. We have a technique called experiential play therapy because some children don't have the language to process their trauma, to process their distress in the way that we would do with adults or teenagers in talk therapy, but we could talk about it. So much trauma is preverbal before a person can speak, preverbal in the brain, before language comes online in Broca's area, or subverbal, which means the trauma is so so much about survival, it's in the midbrain and below the cortex, which handles language. So children simply have an innate capacity to heal in therapy because it just comes out in their play. They're not constructing metaphors. The play is just automatically metaphorical because that's informing the story that they're creating in the play. Me as a therapist, then I'm almost just like the cast on a broken bone. The cast doesn't do anything. It just simply tells the bone, you can move, you can walk, and I'm not going to let more harm come to you. I'm not even going to let you harm yourself. And so the play therapist is simply holding down this sacred space where a child can grab a sword, can grab a gun, can kill me with it. And I will just hold the boundaries. Your parents not going to come in here and tell you you're wrong. They're not going to, no one's going to shame you while I'm here for wanting to be aggressive. But I will keep the cast of, letting you know where you might be in danger. So, anyways, this got me thinking about why does anger come up so much for children in therapy? Doesn't always with adults, because anger has this cultural layer. And now when I reflect back, I've had such breakthroughs with adults in therapy when we found a portal to their inner child. Might have been drawing, playing a game, because the cultural noise, the static, the thoughts that are really their dad's thoughts, their mom's thoughts, their society's, the religious thoughts, we could get underneath that, and the inner child can just show us something through the drawing, through the play. The only way I can get there is by convincing the adult patient the stakes are low enough. No one's going to see your picture. This isn't about being a good artist because they're like, I can't draw, I can't write. It's not about that. It's about just being free for a moment. So we can get past that layer. The play starts to orient us towards where the healing needs to happen. So the child is working out suppressed feelings, but they're often locked up. And if they don't get therapy, this is what comes up later in adulthood, but they're often locked up by a parent through physical or psychological abuse. But in general, the anger of the child is seen in terms of conduct. Whereas for adults, depending on the identity of the adult, has a lot more to do with power and their position in society. So let's look at anger in the matrix of power before I wrap up here. A man's anger. A man's anger, particularly in our patriarchal systems, is often coded as authority or leadership or strength. It's interpreted that way, even by women in many cases, because it is the internalization of patriarchy. A man who raises his voice is more likely to be seen as assertive and passionate compared to a woman. What a woman is going to be more likely, not always, but more likely to be perceived as a bitch, when we don't even have a corresponding word like that for men. You might have to say like man bitch. Or crazy. And Daniel Kahneman, a renowned social psychologist, did experiments where men and women delivered the same assertive statements in office places. Then the researchers collected interpretations from the people who were present, and it didn't really matter the gender identity of the observers. They would kind of fall into predictable patterns where they would interpret the assertive statements from men as leadership or strength, and from women as like difficult to work with or oppositional. So this cultural permission reveals anger's covert alliance with power or dominance, but it also traps men, right? Because the flip side of this is what are men socialized out of and denied because of the patriarchy, how patriarchy harms men? Can men say, and we see this as a problem, men can't easily say, generally speaking, I'm lonely, I'm sad, I miss you. It's more like, where were you? because that feels powerful. Anger is aligned with these like toxic associations with anger, toxic masculinity, because vulnerability is seen as weak. Sadness is seen as weak, or it is feminized. And a man who might express what we would culturally call the softer side of feeling could be shamed out of his gender, even. So a male anger becomes both privilege and prison in this sense. It grants attention because anger for some men is saying, I can't feel sad. I don't know how to feel sad. So I will control you. I will dominate you. And we see this at the level of society. I don't know how to talk about this or to bring in dialogue and cooperation from other people. I'm going to force you to change. I'm going to remove what I think is unfair out of you forcefully, violently. And so what it means is men and the masculinity at different scales have been socialized away from different dimensions of the individual and collective psyche. So again, a woman's anger, by contrast, historically delegitimized. We have a word like hysteria. Hysteria comes from the Greek word for uterus, and hysteria was thought to be a wandering uterus, only applicable to women. One of the treatments for hysteria or hysterical personality disorder was to put like herbs and spices in ancient times to try to coax the wandering uterus back into place, which then would clear up the emotional instability, it was thought, or the overreaction in women. So can a woman express righteous fury or sacred rage without transgressing centuries of conditioning? Because her anger is inherently political and threatens the social order because it names something that the order conceals, which is the injustice of silencing certain identities. And I mean, we could also examine this through the lenses of ethnicity, like a person of white identity in the racial matrix versus the stereotype of black anger, and it's framing as dangerous or threatening. During the slave era, chattel slavery in America, scholars were hired, particularly it was at the University of Louisiana, were hired to actually create mental illness or conditions around anger expressed by black slaves. So at that time, the science was used to prove superiority and inferiority, and then weaponized to culturally construct these hierarchies and the concepts of aggression and why certain races or certain minoritized groups both need to be oppressed and basically to convince the like 90% of the general population who rarely participate actively in these institutions, just like we see today. A small percentage of the population actually participates and sanctions and sponsors the excesses of like military and violence. Anyways, another one, is the adult and child, because even within families and schools, the hierarchy persists. Adults command obedience. Child's anger often invokes punishment, typically from the father. But children's anger can often just signal the same fundamental principle. There's some protest against their powerlessness. So imagine if adults had the patience to engage with that. Here's what power means. Here's where power intersects with your safety. Here's where your safety intersects with my responsibility and love for you. Anyways, you have to have patience for that. And so part of my therapy is also taking time to share psychoeducation with the family, with the parents, while contextualizing the feelings of the child in the play therapy and giving meaningful reflections. Because when we trace these patterns together, anger becomes a diagnostic tool for me, but also for the political animal to diagnose social inequality, because it reveals the emotional architecture of our hierarchies. Who gets to be angry? What is the cost of their anger? It all tells us something about where power lives in our society. So the same neurochemical surge of these of adrenaline, cortisol, it can sanctify in one context, it can stigmatize in another, depending on the body with which these hormones are coursing through and who is feeling it. So to navigate all this as a therapist, I got to learn to distinguish between the biology of anger and the politics of anger. That's what social work is about. First is universal: cortisol, adrenaline, increased heart rate, fire, as in increased body temperature. The second is cultural: history, hierarchy, politics, family dynamics, and who these groups have allowed to feel what and express what, and who has to sit or smolder in their silence, so to speak. Okay, so the work is twofold to wrap this up. It's about humanizing anger in the oppressed, humbling anger in the privileged. And this can help us, as I was saying earlier, reclaim anger, or help anger reclaim its necessary role as simply the pulse of dignity rather than a weapon of control. In psychology, anger is often considered a secondary emotion, like somebody's angry, but it's covering up their sadness. Somebody's angry, but they're deep down, they're lonely. A man's angry, but on a lower level or a subconscious level, he's sad. Or a person with dementia acting out towards their loved one, but really it's because they're protecting the confusion. This is helpful to think of anger as a secondary emotion, but I find more valuable than this is the dialectics of anger, the Tao of anger, which is it is inseparable from all the other feelings or the apparent opposites. The poet, Palestinian American poet Naomi Shihab Nye, has a famous, beautiful poem called Kindness, but there's a couple lines in there that relate. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. So, this time I mean it. To really conclude, consider how these following, let's call them axioms, might relate to your experience. Anger is the heat of fear. Fear is the cold of anger. Not as an actual temperature, because you can be both terrified and furious, and your body temperature might elevate. But I'm talking about the yin and yang of yang being expansion. Anger makes someone go towards the enemy or the obstacle, and contraction in yin, the fear which retreats regardless of temperature. Similarly, anger is active sadness. Sadness is passive anger. This may be more pertinent in gender identity, like thunder and rain, especially powerful in the context of patriarchy. What genders are socialized to feel what, and what are they permitted to express? If a man can't express his sadness, he may go to anger as the acceptable, powerful, masculine side of his sadness. Finally, for real, depression is anger turned inward. Anger is depression turned outward. Again, coming back to themes of control, learned helplessness, often from our experiences in childhood, and the politics of anger. All right. Thank you so much for being patient with me. I hope I don't trigger your angst. And whatever else on your mind, Maureen and others will discuss. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Todd. Oh, wow, you stirred the pot for sure. And I love that last thing that you said about the weather and rain and thunder. And I've often thought about anger as thunder, and that it happens. But if you're constantly running around in thunder, you might want to check your like systems, you know? Like you shouldn't be crying all the time. You shouldn't be bubbling all the time. That the thunder is a thing that happens, you know, that happens. And we're going to pass this to Shannon so she can give our giving statement, but I just wanted to invite you into this contemplation, just threading through A Course in Miracles. So we have this thing that's angry or anger, and it's just a part of the weather system of being human, you could say. And we have this idea of like, could we make it neutral? Like, why have I projected an angry world? Can I see it as neutral? What would it look like to see your anger as neutral? Like, are you strong enough to hold rage for me? Am I strong enough to hold rage for you? You know, that especially if it doesn't happen all the time, especially if we're not in an abusive relationship, but we hold each other's grief, we help with each other's sadness. Like, is there a way to neutralize my meaning of your grief so I can just experience it? And it made me think of the Haka New Zealand dancers who were like intense, and the interpretation of their dance, the meaning behind it is, it's simply saying, it's my time. That's what their rage is saying. That's what their anger is saying. It's my time. So like you said, it's like very directional. And is it okay for you to sometimes be like, this is important to me. This is my time. This is, you know, I have passion behind it, and a tip over passion, it can be interpreted as anger, but maybe it's just really strong passion. Anyway, I've been accused of coming into things with a lot of passion, like 1,000 horses. So people will say like, were you angry? I wasn't. I was just passionate. Anyway, we're going to hear from Shannon, and then we'll come back to the conversation.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to say something after I do this. Okay, so Speakeasy is a non-for-profit virtual spiritual community, and we exist on the generosity of our community members. We thank you for playing your part and for taking the opportunity to make a donation for today's daily bread. Your generous donations help us bring spiritual leaders, artists, and speakers to Sunday service and keep important conversations going. As the law of circulation states, freely we give, freely we receive. As you are spiritually fed by today's conversation, I invite you to go within and see what is yours to share. No gift is too small. The donation link is in the chat and as well on our website, speakeasyspiritualcommunity.com. Do you mind if I pipe in right now for the conversation?
Sure, go for it.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so seriously, I am feeling so angry right now because this triggered my anger. But I'll just express where my anger is coming from right now. It's not towards Todd or, or any of that. It's just the topic of anger and the social constructs that come with anger. It's like, who are we as society to put everything is just a social construct. And it's like, who are we to say, well, a black woman can't be angry, or a woman can't be angry, only a man can be angry, or this or that. And it's like, it makes me very angry right now. You're witnessing someone that's feeling angry towards these social constructs and stipulations of who is allowed to be angry. So that's what's coming up for me right now. And I am so tired of social constructs. We are all allowed to be angry. And angry is broad, and it comes from so many different elements. And there's no hierarchy on anger. Pass.
Well, amen in truth. Amen in truth. But just like when Todd was talking about the Black experience, that if you make it really hard for people to express themselves, it comes out differently. In the same way, like for me, going to Catholic school, girls were not allowed to be sexy. So, you know, every Catholic girl was like, looked like a whore because it was like, don't tell me what not to do. Don't oppress me. And sometimes it's not that we're not allowed to be it, but it's hard to be it, or it's stigmatized to be it. And so it comes out in other ways. That's what I'd say about that. I'll pass it to you, Todd. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for, I think this is such a meaningful starting point for our conversation. And if I could contribute something to what you were both sharing and what Shannon initiated would be, I agree that nature has wired us all with this natural system, this defense mechanism, right? So when you say we're all allowed um, to feel angry, yeah, that's true. And then would it make sense to say that the injustice or the oppression is when somebody weaponizes their power or position to deny somebody's truth? So when a parent abuses a child for expressing something that's uncomfortable that appears as anger to them, in that sense, because of the injustice, the child is not allowed to feel angry anymore. If they learn from their abusive parent that if I try to express my frustration, um, I'm toast. What happens? You know, so that's what I've been inviting people to explore with depression, because depression is so pathologized into the individual. But I'm often curious about, what did you learn about anger growing up, you know, and how was that honored or not, to your point, Shannon? And if somebody committed the injustice of not allowing the individual to develop their natural right to put up their boundaries, um, what kind of harm did that cause? Yeah, thank you, and I welcome any other input.
In A Course in Miracles, we always ask, like, what's the purpose? So that it was really well covered. What is the purpose of this anger? But also we question, like, why have I projected? Because like you said, the call's coming from inside the house. So why have I projected an angry world, or why have I projected an oppressive world? And how can I shift that in my mind so that I can shift that in my experience?
Yeah, and I'll just add one more thing here. You know, one thing that we can't easily escape is the matrix of power. Now, some, as Shannon pointed out, is this toxic social constructs, but other matrices of power emerge in nature. Like, for example, if I parent children, I may have more physical power than the baby.
Mm.
So I do a lot of this in men's work also, which is because men are historically positioned with not only often more physical power over their children, but historically economic power. I mean, we can keep in mind that, like, women weren't allowed to have bank accounts till like I don't know, the 70s or something. So whether he wants to be powerful or not, I tell men, you probably have some power, whether you've asked for it or not. Now, what are you doing with that power? Are you decentralizing it? Are you even aware of it? You know, and so now it's like the Spider-Man quote, with power comes responsibility. And so that is the attenuating energy, and especially true for parents if they want to try to bring, you know, healthy dynamics to the family, where their child learns not to suppress but to transmute feelings and express and have adaptive forms of expression for their truth. Anyways, just a few more thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's really great. Could have used that as a kid, Todd. I mean, I carried a
What
lot
was
of
that?
I said I could have used that as a kid. I carried a lot of, I'll tell that story some other time, but Lisa has a question, and then Will has something to add. Or comment, rather.
I've studied Dr. Gabor Mate extensively. He's been very helpful with me in the realm of addiction. And I just love how he portrays the human being as a biological mammal. And most mammals, for that matter, require two things upon infancy. We require our self, almost like our self-identity, and we also require connection. And as an infant, the connection that we seek is, of course, with our parents. They're our protectors, they're our caretakers. You know, imagine a baby cub. If it didn't have its mother as its protector, it wouldn't last for long. So we need those biologically. And the problem comes is as a small child, we want a cookie, and our mom says, can't have a cookie. And we start to act out because we're mad that we don't get a cookie. And our mom says, little girls, or we don't like angry girls. And we learn at that age that we cannot have an anger or we lose the connection with our parent if we have of of being true to ourselves, seeking our affection will subvert our feelings to keep the connection. And it starts to give ourselves the message of, you know, you have to be this person in order to be loved. And the longer that chronic condition exists, you don't even have a capacity of who you are. You're this person that you think you need to be to keep what you need. And it's an incredible insight on how if you change that, you know, that internal message you learned at such a young age, that suppressing anger isn't something that you will lose your affection and you can regain yourself, your sense of self. And then how you tied it in with our health and that the dysphoria of not being in touch with your true self, that is a state of dis-ease, which thus causes disease. So yeah, thank you. It's really great talk. That's all.
Thanks, Lisa.
Well, I would just say some quick to that. I really appreciate those reflections. That something that can be observed and examined in children is that, you know, if they learn about positive and negative, but as you said, you know, via Dr. Gabor Mate, connection is so important. So what's more meaningful to a small child, especially an infant, not so much the dialectic of negative and positive, like being good versus being bad, but deep versus shallow. So what does a baby and a child learn about depth and connection, and how is it achieved? Because from parenting to school, a kid quickly learns, like, if I'm just doing a good job in the classroom, the teacher goes and grades papers. If I start acting like a clown, they might have to come over and address me. If the child is half content with the baby, half content with some toys, the parent's like, all right, great, I can start dinner, I can do some laundry. Then the baby gets bored and pretends to be hurt, starts crying. The parent comes back and holds the child. And this is, you know, this is all well intentioned and necessary. But what's the child learning? That, oh, wow, this so-called negativity also kind of hotwires connection. The point here is that we can get healthier by disengaging from, let's say, maladaptive expressions of anger, like a child trying to hurt somebody or hurt their sibling by throwing heavy objects. It's like, that's not okay, that's not safe, but it's not interesting to the parent, you know. Whereas when you told me how you felt and what was going on there, what triggered that, God, that's wisdom. You know, I'm so impressed with you. I want to spend time with you to really validate that. You see what I'm saying? So just, I go on and on, but just a couple reflections to that.
Thanks, Todd. All right, Willard.
Well, first of all, Todd, thank you, first of all, for this topic. I have about, I don't know, 13 comments I'd like to make, but I mean, you made me think of a lot of things. But I'll keep it short. I grew up in a family where my mother would, periodically blow her top and, lose her temper, and it would typically blow over pretty quick. But I had a father who lost his temper in my presence one time in my life, and it freaked me out. So I have perhaps a unique and weird perspective, but you were talking about being a teacher. As a teacher, I was in charge of roomfuls of students who, may or may not have wanted to be there. And occasionally I would lose my temper. And it generally got a pretty big reaction. And there were times as a teacher or as a director of student productions where I would absolutely lose my cool and get a terrific reaction. And it, at one point, eventually I became known for this, I guess. And students would come to me, it's like, it's time for you to get angry. Like, we need that. And more than once I was asked for anger, which is bizarre. And so sometimes I had performative anger, but generally not. Sometimes I would absolutely lose my cool. I would feel terrible. I would feel guilty. I feel like that was entirely inappropriate, but I was rewarded for it. And the other, very quickly, thing that it has, I guess, a sort of to do with gender dynamics. And there have been times that I've been asked as a man to go get angry. Go get in there and take care of this or whatever. Like, get that reservation, call the repairman, do whatever you got to do.
Not by me,
No,
by a
no, no,
previous lover.
Okay, somebody else. But I'm just saying, sometimes as a man, I have anger requested or required of me. But the flip side of that is it's very emasculating for me to say, wow, what you said just now, that hurts my feelings. That makes me sad, which is very often the truth. It's like, wow, that was really mean of you. But that is just patently not masculine at all. The socially acceptable thing is, F you, don't you talk to me like that, blah, 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 come back with anger. And so that gender dynamic, from my experience, absolutely cuts both ways. So anyway, you made me think.
Yeah, I mean, and so that sorry, yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, you bring up so many powerful points, and I'd just like to underline the reality that systems of patriarchy, and what I mean by that is not just a government that's run by a king. I mean, patriarchal systems where power is consolidated, different forms of power. Like I was saying, with laws that consolidated economic power with the man in a family. Corporations, Global 500, where 95% of all the leaders are men. So however it happens, it doesn't have to be because of laws. It could just be because of history. The point is that it also harms men. Why? Because of some of the things you're pointing out. If I don't have the courage or the safety to express my sadness because it's interpreted as softness, or it will make me a victim of violence, maybe from a parent or from an authority figure, well, then it's suppressed. And like Carl Jung would say, that something that is suppressed, or like these horror stories with the Wolfman, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, these are allegories for repressed anger. Now, I would just invite men and all people to experiment or explore the intersection of their feelings with power. I think one of the running themes for men, Will, is where do my emotions relate to failure? Um, and so I think sometimes it's hard for a man to say I felt hurt, or to lean into vulnerability with, well, I've been pretty lonely this past month or whatever, this past year, or because of my health issue, I haven't felt confident, because that's too close to failure. And failure means stuff. And a big part of this is what you're saying, which is our dynamics with our parents. Yeah, abuse is abuse, and repression is repression, but it does mean different things in the matrix of power and identity. When it's like, was the father the person who was abusive? Was the mother abusive? The person where I was taught socially, and I see it all around me in the context of civilization, that women are more empathic. Well, why wasn't my mom empathic? Are supposed to be nurturing. So I'm just saying, when some of these stereotypes are broken in our traumas, it's more complex in terms of how we treat ourselves, or how we shame ourselves, or how we open or close conduits of dialogue and expression. So yeah, thanks for illuminating several of those.
Thanks, Todd.
Hey, Marty.
Yeah, hi. Hey, Todd, hey, thanks a lot. It was good hearing you. What you said, I probably got some of it, but you did good.
Thank you. Good to connect.
But my deal, I grew up with both my parents were, they were boozers. They were, and I kind of learned that anger, yeah. If I showed like I was a semi-hard guy, as best I could, I felt that did benefit me at times in my life. I'm not saying it's right, but I just felt that was for me. That was what, at the time I had to do. I certainly don't want to do it anymore, because there's side effects to that. Even though, it's you get away with certain things. Getting away with things is not necessarily good. And I just find that this is Shannon, thanks. I'm sorry about that before, but it's hard being a guy now, because things got to change. It can't be like it's just the way it is. But I got a way to go. I got a ways to go. I've been sober a while. Not that that means anything, but it's a day
I
at a
think that's
time. But I
huge.
have to work on it. I have to work at doing this thing and trying to look at that. Anyway, before I get to where I don't know what I'm saying, I better be quiet. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Marty.
No, those were. Sorry, Maureen, I'll just jump in here real quick. Those were insightful reflections, Marty. Thank you. And there is a powerful relationship between anger and addiction, and in the context of culture, like I was saying, 90% of addiction begins in adolescence. Why? Because, well, usually the reason for that is because substances are medicine for certain individuals. And it's sort of like, if you don't have a headache and you take Tylenol, a person's like, I don't get it. And if you have a migraine and you take Motrin and you get relief, it's like, it's something totally different. And for everybody else, it's like, I don't know if I could be understood because they don't have headaches. The point here is, substances induce emotions, induce experiences. If I can't be angry because I no longer accept it in myself, or it's not received by society or family or my partner, and I don't know how to transmute it, or I don't know how to integrate it, substances help. Substances neutralize it. Alcohol in particular is a depressant, so it slows down the central nervous system, whereas anger amps up the central nervous system. The problem again with addiction is inflation, not just economic inflation, biological inflation. if 1 unit of the substance got me 1 unit of relief, and now it takes 2 units of the substance to give me 1 unit of relief, how long can I do that before the stakes are too high with my health? So I'm saying that to validate the problem of addiction and to validate why someone would choose. Same with self-harm. I can understand why someone would self-harm. And so I think by validating that, because our anger or our control of a situation is complex, and sometimes substances alter that or modulate that complexity. So yeah, thanks for the courage to share some of those vulnerabilities, Marty.
Yeah. I think about anger, and that, like, when you say, like, oh, this bump is really angry, that there's just a lot of inflammation around it. And, inflammation is just like this swollen, angry part of us. It's like, it's a call for love. It's hard to always see it like that, especially if somebody is constantly in a state of anger. But yeah. Anyway, we have TL here. Hi there.
Good morning, Todd. I loved your talk. I'm just going to lower my hand. A couple of thoughts that I had was, first of all, I find people with toxic anger, my response is to feel afraid, even though I might know that it's a call for love. And then the other part that I was thinking of was, since I grew up in an environment that was very scary for me, I knew that I couldn't express my anger, and I also knew that I needed connection. So it was interesting what Lisa had to say. And I was like, how do you take your safety back around expressing anger? I think I still struggle with that, but I think both parts of my question are important, like especially dealing with whether it's a male or a female, doesn't matter to me, just other people's toxic anger. Yeah, thank you.
I agree with the chat. This is a great question. I'll jump in first, which is that you are hinting at something really important, and it does circle back to the notes on addiction, which is that somewhere in our life, especially in our upbringing, whatever we do or don't do with our anger is probably the most adaptive response in those circumstances. So, like, let me give you an example. If a kid is growing up in a home where the mother and father are viciously attacking each other, fighting, verbally abusive, physically abusive, and anytime the kid, let's say the teenage kid, tries to step in and express their frustration, I don't want to live like this anymore, the kid becomes victimized or gets abused. So the kid then goes, screw this, I'm smoking pot up in my room. That's the safest thing to do. I mean, between the two, right? Now, to your point, the challenge is, how do we survive childhood in adulthood? Now we're out of those circumstances, but my brain has already adopted the once adaptive trauma response, now deemed maladaptive by my therapist, right? Or by my doctor or psychologist. So how do I break that cycle when it worked for me? It did work. So I think it begins with self-validation and validating others, like I always do with addiction. When I first came into working in addiction with adolescent, I would just enter that room validating. It makes sense that you all want to get high. And all of a sudden kids like look up like, what? Somebody's that's not, the clinicians are not just going to say drugs are bad. And we already have something in common. I have been interested in altered states of consciousness my whole life. And so the point is just simply, what worked for us? Why do I need to change it now? And why is it a habit? How did it work? Getting in touch with our inner child, internal family systems is a powerful therapeutic lens, and being able to be gentle with ourselves in realizing, you know what, I can start to practice coming back to a way of life that just wasn't applicable before. It was not safe before. And it might take some practice, and it's good, I think, to have support with it, just like we would learning anything that was just unfamiliar. Something else we can ask ourselves when it's like it's just too difficult, when our brain says, I just can't, or it's too difficult. Catch the can't, because that's often not true, and see if we can reframe some of these changes from hard to unfamiliar. Well, this is something totally unfamiliar to me because in my family, it just had no place. But that might, gently open up a portal for transformation. Thanks again. There's a lot more that we could explore with that, but it's a good start.
What do I do when someone is displaying toxic anger?
Go ahead, Maureen. I think.
Oh, sure.
And then I can
Well,
add
here,
to.
because I come from the Course in Miracles background, like everything is a directional. And so I would do what love would have me do. I would go to the Holy Spirit and I would say, what would you have me do? And that, when I say love, I'm not talking about martyrdom. I'm talking about love that includes me. And so, like, I can't give you a pat answer because there's 1,000 different, possibilities in regards to your personal situation. Sometimes I would say, well, or the Holy Spirit would say, well, lean in and listen. Or sometimes the Holy Spirit would say, leave. Alanis Morissette has this great song called At That Particular Time. At that particular time, love required me to stay. At that particular time, love required me to leave. So love requires us to do what's specific to each individual situation. You get to form your own inner compass and trust in that compass. We could tell you the choreography of it, but we'd be incorrect, because you're in the situation that's correct for you, and you have your own compass that will tell you exactly what to do, where to go, and what to say. But this is what I will say about that. In regards to my own personal dance with anger, I remember this one time that I got so angry that I literally hurt myself. I was at this church and I had come up like Shannon. I felt 2 younger brothers who had so many privileges, and I had 5 older sisters who had so little privileges in regards to the church that I grew up in. And I was so caught in the middle and so angry about it. And I found a new way of being. I went to a new church and I found this place that had equality, but I went to this moon gathering one night, and the teacher who was supposed to facilitate it, she brought in this guy. And he stood in front of the room and he said, okay, everybody kneel down. But there's only women there. And I was like, you want me to kneel to you? It's not going to happen on my watch. And everybody kneeled because everybody's too polite. And finally, I said, like, what's happening here? And then some other woman said, yeah, why are you leading this women's meeting? And, the leader was like, oh, it's good, and I was like, I didn't co-sign this. I didn't come for this. I'm not up for this. And I went home. I was so angry. He was a nice guy. It had nothing to do with him. I just had this anger in me. And I got on the phone to a friend and I was telling her, this happened and this happened and this happened. And I leaned over to pick something up and I blew my back out. I was in so much anger that I literally hurt my back. And I realized this was something very important for me. And so I paid attention to that pain, that anger, that direction. And I went and created my own church that honored the divine feminine. So that's what you can do with your anger. You can use it as fuel to fire up what you're here to do. Instead of letting it take you out and burn you out, let it fire you up. But that's good use of anger, so that you don't harm yourself, you don't harm anyone else, but you use it as directional. That's what I'd say about that.
Thank you. I love the word compass too here. Let me just add on to that real quickly, that a helpful acronym, given what you shared about your family and your history, is RAIN. Recognize what you're feeling, because anger kind of makes us fixate on the environment. So recognize what's happening inside of you. Allow it, because you might find you have a pattern of not allowing yourself to feel that because you couldn't feel that in childhood. Investigate. what is this bringing up in me, and then nurture it so that you can break trauma responses that you feel no longer serve you. And then secondly, life in healing is nonlinear. It's often like this upward spiral. We know what a downward spiral is like when our habits are overpowering us and quickly taking us into a darker place. But the upward spiral is like, sometimes it's like we unconsciously revisit themes in relationships. Why might a person say, how come I'm always ending up with emotionally unavailable partners? Maybe there was a neglectful parent, and unconsciously, without the rain, the person is seeking their parent so that this time the caregiver will give me the attention. But it just ends up playing out the same trauma. And that is sometimes how unconsciously the patterns in life look like victimization or look like self-fulfilling prophecies. So we might untangle some of that as well to try to examine why we might find ourselves gravitating towards unhealthy dynamics.
That's a great answer. Thanks, TL. Hello, Liliana.
Hello. Thank you, Todd. My heart's beating a million miles an hour right now. I just realized something during this talk, and just something that came to my awareness as I was sitting here listening, and the anger patterning that has actually shifted since the Course in Miracles. I mean, it just actually just landed on me right now. When I was growing up, I had a really pretty angry mother. And like you, Will, I think I saw my father lose his temper one time in my whole entire life. But my mother, there was no problem with that ever. And throughout my dealings with that, as I left the house and whenever I would get angry, I would beat the living shit out of myself. I would beat upon myself until I bruised. And I would beat upon myself until it hurt so bad. And then I would feel like, okay, my anger's out. And I realize now, and that came into adulthood. I would go into the bathroom, I would go out back, I would scream bloody murder, but I would beat on myself, not on things, just on my legs, on my face, on my arms. And I realize just now I have not done that in so long. And the shift, it was almost like it unconsciously has been dispersed from me taking my anger out that way. In fact, I rarely get angry anymore. And I haven't, and I'm just like coming to this awakening right now that this has not happened. This has been healed. And thank you for, I don't think I would have ever actually seen it until, I don't know when it would have dawned on me. But anyway, thank you so much.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
beautiful.
Really beautiful.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Liliana, something that we can't always see is that, like, let's say somebody didn't go through what you went through in terms of how you were treated, not just how you treated yourself, but how you were treated. And so they don't necessarily have that kind of charge coursing through them. The distance from, having a tiny temper to having no temper, very small. But going from where you went through, you made just such a long pilgrimage to self-acceptance. And so I just want to honor that you traversed a very difficult and long terrain. So it's quite heroic.
Yeah, and little, in
yeah,
regards
I'm
to Course
inspired.
in Course in Miracles, and this will be our last question. Hi, Marilys, glad you're here. In regards to Course in Miracles, it is a miracle to watch these things just slowly slip out the back door so gently that you didn't even notice they were gone. I had the same thing with staying alone in a place. I didn't have, I had a lot of fear around being by myself in a house. And when one day I woke up, I was like, that's no longer there. I don't have that anxiety anymore. So I love that. And it gives hope to other people who are on that path to say, Don't worry about trying to heal that. Just do the next right lesson, the next right meditation. That will melt like April snow. Hey, Mary Lisa.
Hi, yeah, I'm Mary Lisa, and I'm so glad to be here. And it was really, really true that I sat down in front of my computer furious with Marty because he had surgery and he came down the stairs by himself. And then I sit down and it's about anger. And I realized that, of course, my anger was from fear that he would hurt himself and from, feeling like I should be able to control everything. Like if everybody just did what I told them to do, everything would be fine. I know, and so thank you, Todd, so much because you gave me so many different ways to think about it. We're relatively new to A Course in Miracles, and it's just so powerful. It's so we've been doing it Marty, for like 3 or 4 months, and it's so powerful. And I feel it's like I have to remember that transformation is both quick and slow. It's quick once you get there, and it's a road to travel to get to where you get to it. So I just want to thank everybody. Everything that everyone shared has been amazing. And Todd, I on your I just put in your podcast on my list. So I'll be hearing from you. Thank you so much.
All right. And forgive Marty. He just wants to do it his way too.
So at one point I turned my camera off and went over to where he's sitting and gave him a kiss because I was wrong.
All right. Well, glad we can make that happen for you.
I just want to share real quickly, because I share your gratitude for our community. Just that, we can also be curious about whether our anger, and of course this intersects differently with different identities, but is our anger courage without patience? And in the Tao of anger, or is our patience anger without courage? And to see what that means in our families. Do I need more patience? Patience shares its root with compassion, compati. Do I need more patience, like compassion for myself or others? Or do I actually need more courage? But I couldn't be courageous because of what my anger would have meant, like in my family or society.
Yes.
Thank you.
That sounds like accept the things you cannot change, the courage to change the things you can. So yeah, that's super helpful. We can all apply that. Well, friends, this has been amazing. And we apparently could stay here all day talking about anger. But please check out Todd's podcast, subscribe and share it with your friends. Kind Mind podcast. And next week, we have Laura Fenimore from the Foundation of Inner Peace. I hope you join us. And in the meantime, have a beautiful week. God bless. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.